Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here. Welcome you to another episode of MetaPod, where we're focusing on the three common challenges that industrial organizations and industrial service providers face, and it's the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, the AI conversation certainly central to that in the modern times, and then just the endless pressure to do more with less. And I've got a couple of great experts here, Scott McIsaac and Len Landale with Secure24. They'll introduce themselves in a couple of minutes, but they're coming at this around this whole notion of, AI agents doing real work. What happens to, your services organization and everybody else when your software starts acting? And they're going to define what that means. So this episode's for you if you're involved with running operations, you have IT or services functions at a company you're responsible for, being told to adopt AI, but maybe can't tell the signal from the noise. And you might worry about labor gaps you can't hire your way out of, and you're trying to figure out which work stays human, which doesn't. So I really like about the guys prepared here, really helps us get at kind of all three of those challenges we talk about, right? The forever labor shortage, digitization, AI application challenges, and the pressure to do more with less. So they kind of treat all of those topics pretty nicely. So with that, Len and Scott, why don't you introduce yourselves to the audience? Tell us a little bit about Secure24.
Thanks. Just a quick correction. We actually are part of Helios Core. Secure24 was a business that we had.
Thank you for correcting
back a few years ago, and that business sold to NTT. So my name is Scott McIsaac. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Helios. We launched Helios maybe a year and a half ago with the idea to help our clients solve AI challenges within their businesses. So we've went down a path of, kind of strategy and AI consulting. We've done platforms, we've done, agent builds, things like that. And we're really shifting our focus back to kind of where we came from. Len and I both come from the IT managed services space. We have, 25 plus years of experience running MSPs. And we kind of looked at the world around where it's going and how, if we would have had this technology, 10 years ago, how we would have applied it to that business. And so we really leaned back into our history to create Helios and the platform that we're running to help solve IT managed services. So we can obviously do things in other areas, but for the most part, we're really focused in on how do we solve these IT problems and how do we help our clients, with what you said, like, there's a lot of enforcement of AI onto people today, and a lot of companies don't even know where to start. So we're really kind of honing into that IT services space and how do we help those clients solve those problems.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Great to be here. Len Landale, so also a co-founder with Scott, and like you said, we've worked together for the better part of 20 years. I used to run the applications practice, and Scott used to run the infrastructure. So we're two sides of the same coin. We probably had some fights in the past over who was right and who was wrong or who was causing the problem. So it's interesting because we're coming at this from kind of different lenses and different worlds, right? Applications was very labor intensive, very people focused, people heavy. Infrastructure had a lot more automation, a lot more technical things to automate. So when we look at what a business can do with this new technology, and as Scott said, we wish we had this 10 years ago. That's what we're building. The tools that we wish we were able to take advantage of. So it's been exciting. It's been fun, and we're seeing amazing strides that companies can do if they start to take advantage of this now and get ahead of it, because the curve is steep here.
No doubt about it. Awesome. So I'm looking forward to this. We're going to next move into the part of the podcast we talk about the diagnostic, right? What are three key areas you would advocate, a manufacturer, industrial company should be assessing, right? Getting a bit of a baseline. So it's kind of like, what do we look for? How do we measure that? How do we, if we're giving advice to somebody sitting on the board of directors or it doesn't have a technical background, what kinds of questions should we be asking for? How should we determine if we have a burning platform to do something different with respect to our AI strategy that affects us? So you've got these three different areas. I'm really looking forward to you guys unpacking that a little bit. I'll let you guys get started. I think you want to kind of focus in on the forever labor shortage and the expertise you can't hire.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first one, Ron, is the labor shortage, right? And everyone's always being asked to do more with less, and budgets are always shrinking, and work never is. So I think the first thing for people to look at, I mean, they need to get educated. To Scott's point, right? Like people are just there's so much noise versus signal. Like get really start looking at what the capabilities are with these frontier models. Look at training. I mean, that's one of the things that Scott mentioned. We started early on because we recognized that was a gap. But when you're looking for opportunities within the business, try to find those ones that are, high volume, low judgment, right? Relatively easy to make a decision. If there's a lot of inbound and someone is doing work to make a decision after, looking something up in a system, or, going to check with Billy, that volume that's not super complicated is a great starting point. Because what we find a lot of the times, and one of the reason that we've narrowed our focus, is our early conversations with people when we were just identifying opportunities to use AI on in the business, quickly went from some simple ask to an entire business process, which is absolutely possible. You can take entire business processes and automate them with AI, but it's costly, and it has a lot of precursors, right? Like the systems that you're using have to be exposed so technology can work with it, and the data and the process has to be well documented, because it's not just going to know how to work in your business. So you want to avoid that. You want to not devolve into boiling the ocean and trying to solve everything, out of the gate. Like we advocate for this crawl, walk, run. So if you can deploy an AI agent into your business, or if you can deploy AI tools for your team to use, have them focus on, those high volume, low value tasks that can be easily shifted. It also helps with the concern and consternation that an employee base is going to have, that you start deploying AI or AI agents specifically that can do work in the business, and everyone gets concerned. And we don't think that should happen, because everyone should be recognizing they still have a lot of value to bring to the organization, and focusing their energy on the more complex tasks, and let AI be your coworker, right? Let it be a digital employee in your business. So
I think,
from a volume perspective, that's where I'd say to start.
yeah, I think the thing that we see the most is there's a lot of, boards that are out there that are starting to mandate AI. And when companies really don't know where to start, they always start with, well, I bought Copilot for everybody. Well, that's not a strategy. So you can't just throw tools at a person and expect them to be more efficient with them. You have to give them the ability to train on those tools. You have to explain how to use them. You have to really get to the point where they understand what they have in front of them and the power of what they have in front of them. And and it's not just as simple as buy Copilot, right? I mean, or Claude, or any of these technologies. You've got to give them the tools to use them. So I'd say that's the first kind of pitfall that we see companies do, and the reason they do it is because they don't know where to start, right? They don't even know or understand it. They see a lot of marketing out there around Claude or Copilot or whatever it might be, ChatGPT, and they're like, okay, well, we'll just give them these tools. So for us, it's really, you have to start with a strategy, and almost getting, across the business, building that strategy, right? It's not just one department that can do it. And this is not an IT problem. Everyone is also associating with, AI being an IT problem. It's not, it's a business problem. And when you start these kind of groups or small AI boards within the business, you bring people across all of the different organizations, and you start bringing them together to solve problems. And you start with this, like Len said, the crawl. Like, what's the simple thing we should start with? Okay, well, maybe we need to get all our users trained first. Let's do that. And then it's, now that we have that and we know people how to use it, we can start adopting more complex AI challenges. And and defining what AI is too, because to a lot of people, AI is a chatbot. It's not, right? That's the very top of the iceberg, or the very tip of the iceberg is it's a chatbot. But at the end of the day, it's a fully functioning digital employee that you can use if you build it the right way. So start small, define the problems, define the challenges in the org, and then start tackling those kind of one by one to figure out how AI could apply and how it could use those. But if you don't have the training in the team, it's never going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that correlates a lot with what I'm hearing from other thought leaders in this space. You got to think big, strategy, business outcomes, what we're really trying to accomplish. But then the actual application, you got to think small, very tactical, very specific problems. One of the things you mentioned in the notes here was this tribal knowledge concentration. That resonated with me. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing with kind of tribal knowledge. There's multiple levels of tribal knowledge. There's the company that has, Joe in the corner that has all of the knowledge on how to do pricing, right? So what happens when Joe retires? Who has that knowledge? So that's kind of the first area of it. And then it's the tribal knowledge of how to do certain processes, right? There might be a few people that do it. And we've seen this in a couple of times when we've actually quoted out a few agents for them. The process is super complex, and you start diving into it, and one of the inputs are you need to know this particular type of material that gets used in this manufacturing process, let's say. And you start asking the question, because if we don't know anything about their processes and how it works, we start asking the question of like, okay, how do I know what material I'm supposed to select in here? And they're like, well, we just know it.
They're like, it's clearly a headlight lens. You use this. We're like, where's that?
We're like,
down?
well, how does the AI agent know that? Like, if you don't trade it on that, like, sure, it's going to have a ton of knowledge, but your particular use case says you use this material in that headlight. My AI agent's not going to know that unless you tell it. So you got to start with the data and start piecing out those things and, pulling out that tribal knowledge from these people and documenting it. The companies are really, really bad. And this applies really in the IT spaces too. Like, they don't document their processes. They don't document the knowledge that they have. Like, if you don't do that, how is AI ever going to help you? Because it's going to guess, it's going to hallucinate. It's not grounded on anything. So start with pulling out that data.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like that first use case of, the guy in the corner that knows all the intimate ways of working and is ready to retire. You can't, if you haven't done it now, there's no way to replace that individual because you need to hire someone 20 years ago and work alongside them. So that is an interesting application of AI, because now you can point it at their email. You can point it at every quote that they have ever worked on and start to create a corpus of knowledge just from that. That would be very expensive historically to have someone do, but these tools have gotten very good at that. So there are opportunities like you can pick and choose how to use AI within your organization. And that's definitely, one of them. But to get to this agentic mode, like where we're working towards, you need that entire chain, like Scott was mentioning.
Yeah, so you said something there. I want you to unpack that. You said agentic mode. Like, we're all supposed to know what that means. Tell us what that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, sorry, we're deep in the world. Yeah, so if you think about like Scott was saying, the chatbots, the co-pilots, the Claude AI, they're the tip of the iceberg, right? So those are tools that individuals can use to make their workflow more efficient, right? It can help them review documents. It can help them analyze data. But I need to get the data and put it in, and then I need to ask it the questions about the data, and then I need to interpret the results, and I need to go back and forth and iterate with it, which is amazingly effective and great. Like, definitely start there. But people right now run business processes, right? And they interact with each other, and they make decisions on their own about what the next thing should be. If you're talking about an agent, it's got that level of independence. It will take the inputs. It will reason over them.
Is that what you mean by agentic?
Yeah. So moving away from you interacting and telling AI, hey, analyze this data, tell me what the value of this should be, and then taking it and doing something with it, is you take the human out of the loop, and you give an AI the knowledge and the tools to execute that process from beginning to end. So let's say I'll use our world as an example in IT, right? So we build agents that work autonomously in IT ticketing systems and operations. So imagine a ticket comes into a service desk today. It doesn't go into a ticketing system that a human looks at. It goes into a ticketing system that our agent looks at. The agent reads the ticket and understands what it is. Ron locked himself out. Okay,
Right.
well, I need to fix that. Well, how do I fix that? Well, first of all, I have to verify who Ron is. So I go through a process of either a one-time passcode that I text you like your bank would, or, an authenticator app. I verify you. And then once I verified you, I go and call a tool to unlock your account in Active Directory. And then I confirm that you're unlocked. I document that whole thing and you're done, right? Your ticket is solved. Your problem is solved. That entire loop was handled by an AI. That's an agentic mode. So
Yeah.
that's where you can get to now, and we're building towards.
To dumb it down a little bit further, agentics and agentic AI is a fancy word for intelligent automation.
Okay.
That's all it is. So it's processes that these AI agents or AI can execute that solves problems intelligently. And so that's really, if you break it down, that's all it is. It's just a fancy term for automation. And there's different levels of AI too. AI isn't new. Like everyone started hearing about AI in the last few years when these GPTs or these transformers got released, when you have chatbots and things like that. But AI has been around for years. It's just, again, it's intelligent automation that has always been executed. There's a lot of, I'm sure there's a term that you've heard, Ron, is RPO, robotic process automation, right? It's the same thing, but that's more linear, where agentic AI can be more unstructured, right? So it can go different paths into the workflow, but it can reason and understand and how to navigate that process. So, where an RPO process may say, I go to step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. Well, what happens when something comes into step 3 already and it doesn't know what to do with it, right? So this is the intelligence that wraps around that to make it less linear.
Okay, cool. So unpack for me a little bit. This is kind of moving into the second area of the diagnostic around process legibility. What do you mean by that? Why does that matter? And what are we fishing for to understand that?
I think when I hear process legibility, I think of like truly documenting the process, all the way from step A to Z, right? We need those processes documented, because if they don't, how do you automate them? And it's no different than, again, back to the RPO days. How did you build, automation, in your processes? Well, you had to document it, start with that. Right. And we find a lot of times people put the cart before the horse, so to speak. They want to have all this automation and all this AI in their business, but they don't have the basics done. Right. Their data isn't ready to be able to be used for AI. Their process isn't documented. They're to get into the really complex, meaty type stuff that's going to add a ton of value to these businesses, that has to be laid out. Right. And then from there, you can build on it. You can do automation. You can build AI on top of those things.
So what tools have you used? I've had a lot of success using a form of value stream mapping. You think about a swim lane map, a functional swim lane map, so you can understand functionally what's going on, but then capture it and begin to understand, who's doing what, why, what systems to access, how long does it take, what are the delays, what are the problems, and then when we have a problem, how do we solve the problem? What tools do you use a technique like that, or is another baselining recommendation you might have?
No, I'd say that's a similar technique to how we've approached it. I mean, the taking what they have is a great starting point, but then almost, I don't know if you've ever heard of the game that you could play with your kids. I've done this in the past, is you ask them to write down the instructions for something, right? Hey, how do you brush your teeth? Well, first you get the toothbrush and you put toothpaste on it. Okay. So you take the toothbrush and you put toothpaste on the handle, right? Well, they weren't clear. They said just put toothpaste on it. Well, I put toothpaste on the handle. Isn't that the right thing? So you start to take, I'm being facetious, but you start to take that approach. You take their existing documentation and you analyze it with that critical eye to say, like, an agentic AI is going to perhaps interpret what you said differently. So you need to add specificity. Right. So you start to look at existing processes just through that lens, and that gets you to probably what I would call your phase 1 try. And then you start running through some examples in the process to find your edge cases. Right. Now, before this, you need to your point, you need to map out the system. If they don't know what, step 3 is, I have to log into the ERP system and do X, Y, Z. Well, they have to get to the point of describing that. But once you've built that, then you can start having the AI run through test cases, and you can do that at scale in a test mode. Right. So if you can run 1,000 test cases through the process that you define, you quickly start to identify those edge cases. And then you can refine it from there to get to a beta or a productive run, right? So what you've described is a great process, and we do take what they've got and start with it, and then start to analyze it from a simplicity perspective to see where they're making errors that a human would interpret one way, but an AI might interpret another way, and then take it forward to use cases.
Very cool. Let's move into this third area of a diagnostic that you had offered in the notes, around this whole doing more with less challenge. And you talk about cost per outcome, not cost per head count. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, we're very focused on the IT world, but this is applicable across the board, right? Where there's a input to a process and someone does work, and then there's an output to that process, right? We think of it in IT tickets, right? So if you've got 100 people on your team and every one of them is doing 10 tickets right now, but you're going to scale your business and your bosses challenge you to say, hey, listen, you need to do 15 because we're going to go up by 50% work. How do you get there? And to Scott's point earlier, maybe some of that is tools and training, right? Just the tools are amazing. So if you can integrate AI into that person's workflow, then they may be more efficient because they don't need to do as much manually. But if you can peel off that high volume, low value piece from everyone, right, into an agent that's doing that autonomously, you may be able to double, triple, or quadruple that team's output just because, like the pricing example Scott gave, right? That can be a very complex process. But if your organization does a ton of quotes in order to get business, that may be a good use case. The IT example, the IT example is password resets, right? It happens all the time. People are locked out, so they can't do something themselves. They generally call. That's the highest cost interaction for an IT group. They have to talk to the person, then do the work, right? So if you can eliminate that, maybe that's 30 or 40% of the workload. All of a sudden, I've got 30 or 40% of the team working on other more complex issues. So that's the way we look at it, to increase that capacity without adding headcount.
Yeah, and it shifts the way of thinking too. When you start thinking in terms of outcome and ROI, it starts looking past just the cost of people, right? Because, let's say you have a process that needs to get executed, and that process is your business is running around, right? If that doesn't get executed correctly, what does that cost the business, right? If you have a person that's sitting there doing that every day and executing that process, what does it cost the business when they fail, right? So it's really to try to turn the thought and thinking around outcome driven versus, in the full context of that cost versus just thinking about my labor cost, because it's much more than that. And so we really like to drive around the outcome. The other piece is people don't work in simplistic processes either. Like, to Len's point, yes, we see a lot of password reset type stuffs in IT services, but the more meaty things that we get that actually have a lot of cost in the organization with just people, processes, what happens when it doesn't execute, those sort of things are let's say HR. HR comes in and says, hey, I need to remove this person at 5 p.m. tonight. I need his mailbox forwarded to his manager. I need his licensing revoked in Office 365. I need his access removed from our SAP ERP environment. If that doesn't get executed correctly, there's a massive cost to the business, right? And so the idea is, how do you look at it from that outcome perspective and building that workflow or that automation that's going to do all of those things the right way every time, and make sure that we don't have risk or someone, oh man, we forgot to disable the user, now they still have access to the environment. So it's really just shifting that mindset away from the total ownership of that process versus just the headcount piece.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Anything else from a diagnostic perspective before we move into the all-important what do you do to solve the problems?
Yeah, I mean, again, back to the diagnostic side, like, don't boil the ocean. As you're thinking about these things, don't start with the most complex workflow that you have in your business. Start with something simple. measure the adoption of that simple process and how AI is impacting it. Look at that total ownership around it, the total cost of ownership around, implementing it, and show real value before you move into the next meaty thing. So start small and build.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say around that, where you can start, is a lot of your listeners probably have or parts of their organization that do either have seasonality to them or extended coverage, right? So how can you augment your team to offset that seasonality peak or that overnight coverage that you may have to pay someone that they're not doing a lot of volume? You can add agentic AI into your business that's covering some of these areas. And again, maybe they don't cover 100% of that workload of that team, right? But if they can cover 30% of it, you can free up 30% of that team to do other work, or you can spike 30% less during seasonality, or maybe 50% less during seasonality, because, if the work that spikes is a continuous curve, you're going to have more of the stuff that an AI agent could do in the spike. So it just does more, right? So
Yeah,
that's another way to look at it.
In our world, I mean, think about, something goes bump in the night, the system goes down, a process crashes. You have to wake someone up now in order to fix that problem, because businesses operate 24/7.
Right.
So there's a huge cost of doing that, right? Not just in labor costs, but in, the business costs. How does that, the morale of that employee, because I had to wake him up at 2 a.m. right now. If I can have AI
impact to the
injected,
system is the
if
other
I can
part
have
of that.
AI injected into the process and solve it for that person, so or at least do the work that they don't have to go. So if you do call them at 2 a.m., you call them at 2 a.m. and the AI says, "Hey, I've already looked at this process. I understand why it's failing. You have to, this server crashed. We need to reboot that server. Would you like me to do it for you?" And the person can be like, "Yeah, sure, go do it." And then log in and just spot check it, as opposed to having to do the full triage themselves, right? That can apply to any businesses or any type of on-call scenario where, humans are involved to do things. If you can give context and solve a lot of the work that they don't have to do in the middle of the night, you're going to create a happier employee. You're going to create a better process. You're going to create, real ROI and real value from doing this.
Well,
And it also takes away from the idea of AI is taking my job too. Well, no, it's not taking my job. It's actually making me way more efficient, and I don't have to deal with all this other, crap that I would have had to deal with before.
I was just going to add the other thing that does too, Ron, that I think is important to put out there is it reduces business downtime, right? To Scott's point, everything runs on IT. So if that first pass is an intelligent engagement to the person who needs to fix that problem, now your downtime goes down, right? They don't have to do the initial triage. They don't have to log in and look at the logs. They're presented with something that says, here's what occurred, and here's what I believe you need to do to fix it. And as the systems become more intelligent and as the tools become more available to them, then that scope grows, and therefore you continue to reduce downtime. Again, we take a very IT lens to this, but that's appropriate in other systems as well, right? If you've got production line controllers that are running and you've got inputs from them, or if you've got telemetry from lines, right? If you feed that into an agent and it can start to recognize patterns, or at the very least, it can dispatch someone with more information. So when they get to the site, they know, oh, it went down because of X. Maybe it's hydraulic pressure. If a machine went down because of hydraulic pressure, I should probably bring hydraulic fluid with me. Maybe I bring some fittings. But if they just get the call that says the line's down and the machine is broken, they're going to show up and they're going to do all that diagnostics themselves. So similar example to the IT scenario, but maybe a little bit more manufacturing related. But that's the kind of thing, if you have the telemetry, you can now advance the team that's doing the work in the field with better intelligence.
All right. We're going to pivot now and kind of focus in on what to go do. And you've been leaning into that along the way, right? You've kind of been describing leaning into the go-dos. Maybe we kind of move into kind of summing it up. Where do you go? Let's assume that, we do have a burning platform. We have gaps. We have these kinds of challenges that you're talking about. What's the sage advice? They can't easily go Google on their own. And what do you go do? What should we be doing to close the gaps on these sorts of challenges?
So Scott touched on it at the beginning, but I'll just reinforce it here, is that AI strategy. Don't just buy the tools, and hope it works out. Really sit down, and this is something we help companies with as well, but there's lots of organizations that do this, and find people in your organization across the various stakeholders, get them in a room together, and it doesn't have to be like a 6-week offsite session, right? But just sit down and be like, okay, how are we going to empower people, and what business processes make sense for us to start looking at? Where is that 80% high volume work that isn't adding a ton of value, but we just have to do it to keep the lights on? How can we start getting some of that off of people's plates? To Scott's point, that if you do it that way, the individuals are going to be thankful that their job isn't, 60% mundane processing, 40% complex thinking, right? They're going to now be 80% complex thinking, 20% mundane processing, and hopefully that makes them a better employee and want to be at that company. So starting there and doing that strategy and identifying those processes is probably the first phase or first step. And then, starting to work through that strategy, getting the tools, doing the training, building the AI that's going to do the work if you're going to take it off of people's plates.
I would say, to add on to that, is don't be afraid of the technology either. We have a customer that we've been working with for a little bit now. And when we started with them, technology scared them. I mean, they're a manufacturing company. That's what they know. That's where they've been for, 30 plus years. And technology scares them. And to the point where they weren't implementing any of this technology. So when we got in there, we started showing, the value of what you can do. And they started seeing, how that could apply to their business. And just that right there unlocked a ton of capabilities for them. And they realized it's not as scary as it sounds, So my perspective is just there is a lot of noise out there. There is a lot of FUD. There is a lot of, people are just, against technology because, well, it's not what they do. It's not what they know. But don't let that deter you from doing this. In the message we kind of told them is like, look, if you're not going to do this, your competitors are. So if you want to stay ahead, start doing this thing. And again, you don't have to start big. Start small. Get your users trained. Roll out a few of these tools. Start understanding your business processes. Start building, just that strategy around how you could apply it to your business. And it starts unlocking something in their heads that then they start seeing the value. And now it's wide open for these guys. They're seeing how much it can actually help them in their business. So.
Yeah, so I can't not say something here. I've actually been running LinkedIn live events. I have one coming up this week, actually tomorrow on Thursday, around, we call it an AI risk exposure roadmap. And it's basically a way for an organization to just have a conversation around 6 key elements to the bigger strategy and just do a maturity assessment at some level. Mm-hmm. And then, and then trying to see where they're at against the competition is a piece of that puzzle of, is this an opportunity Absolutely. That's creating leadership for us, or are we actually laggers, right, behind the curve? And it's, our competitors could lap us on this, and that's a super important conversation. So I can't help but make a pitch on that, on that. But if you guys take a peek at that, I'd be interested in some feedback.
Yeah.
So what else should we be doing? What else should we go do, go implement to address these challenges we talked about earlier?
Find a partner. Don't try to do this on your own. When we started Helios a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, however long it's been now, we really thought about how do we help our clients do this. And it doesn't have to be us. There's a lot of companies that do these strategy and roadmap sessions, but find someone that's going to help through the journey. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of choices. There's a lot of confusion out there. And honest with you, we really related it back to, 15, 16 years ago when cloud was really coming out. People didn't know how to manage cloud. They didn't know how it was impacting their business. You still had a lot of people wanting to hold on to their servers. And, the ones that were trying to adopt it were struggling because it was complex. It was different. AI is no different. You need to have someone that's trusted, that's an expert in this. And yes, you could hire that talent in-house. It's really hard to find people that know this, and it's really expensive. But find a partner that you can work with on this that can help bring value into the business, that can help map out your processes and understand what you're doing. You don't try to do it on your own.
Len, any other advice for the audience before we move in to wrap up?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Scott was saying is don't try to do it on your own. The complexity is definitely there, and it's moving way faster than the cloud revolution did. The tools are developing faster. The capabilities are developing faster.
We
So
can't even keep up with it.
It's tough to keep up when you're in the swim lane, let alone trying to run a different business and learn this stuff. So definitely do that. I think don't get discouraged. I would say is the other thing is that, there is a study that I think is not a great study, but it talked about all these pilots failing and they had a bad sample set. I won't get on my soapbox about it, but a lot of people are trying something. It doesn't work out exactly as they had expected, or they tried to bite off too much or whatever, but they get discouraged. And then someone in the, leadership is like, it's a flash in the pan and it's never going to pan out. Like I wouldn't want to be on that side of history. Again, from people that are in there building with it deep in the stream, it's going to be revolutionary, and keep finding the use cases, keep trying to roll it out. That is the tenacity is going to make your business successful, because if you get it right and get it embedded now, you're going to be way better than someone who waits even 6 to 12 months, and to the points that your competitors are going to do it, they are. And further to that, there's going to be well-backed startups that build manufacturing companies from the ground up with this technology embedded in it. And their processes are going to come without any of that legacy, without the system debt, without the tribal knowledge problem and everything else. And now you're competing with a new breed. So, start now, but don't get discouraged doing it.
Yeah, I would add one last thing into is don't forget about security. So I did mention there's a lot of FUD in this space. I'm going to go create a little bit more FUD right now just because this is one that's pretty near and dear to my heart. Anything you implement, any technology that you use, make sure you're looking at it from a security lens. It's something as simple as like, oh yeah, my users, Joe over here uses ChatGPT. He's got the free version of it. It's amazing. Don't do that. They're training on your data. They're doing a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing. At least at a bare minimum, get enterprise accounts on these things or business accounts, and then go through and configure those business accounts so they don't train on your data. You know what's happening. You know where your data is going. Don't use the free versions and do that. The problem is we've also seen the opposite of this spectrum. Companies just putting policies, and I think this is less now than it was maybe 6 months or a year ago. Don't put a policy in place that says you can't use AI, because people are just going to circumvent that and you're going to create a bigger risk to your business. So, start now, put the policies in place, put the processes in place that are, that people can use to go get this technology, give them the trainings, sign up for enterprise accounts. Don't skimp on the small things is my point on this, because you put your business at risk if you don't.
Yeah, for the audience, I have a guest coming up pretty quick. His name is Cliff, and he's in the top 3 people on the planet when it comes to this whole cybersecurity thing and the things we worry about. He developed a ton of the applications used by the U.S. military and various governmental entities over the last 10 years. So Cliff's going to unpack that whole security thing in a future episode of MetaPod. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. This was really great stuff. Let's pretend that, they like what you had to say. They'd want to talk to you more. How does someone get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, our website is helios-core.com. So if you want to learn more about our offerings and what we do, you can check us out there. You can email us at info@helios-core.com, and that'll go to a team that'll get in touch with you and help you on your journey.
Awesome. Scott, anything else?
No, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We like getting on these types of, podcasts and be able to just give our view on the world. So I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like MetaPod and be sure to refer it on to others in your network you think could benefit. I'm always looking for great presenters like these folks here. If you have suggestions and feedback for me, you know how to reach me at metaexperts.com and contact Ron, and we go from there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.